Hi everybody, Scott here. I wanted to talk about the theme of surrender, and it can be quite a sort of an intangible, elusive word and experience for Christians. But I just wanted to firstly say that surrender, I think, is what separates spiritual Christians from people that are just doing sort of general self-development. Nothing wrong with self-development, but I think it can only take a person so far, because I think self-development in and of itself is relying on inner resources from like a humanistic perspective to make changes, make adjustments and changes. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But I think that's different to surrender. And that surrender is like a spiritual action that takes place between the person and the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, God, Jesus, all of the above. And that the experience of surrender, when someone's experienced it, is very different to like a general life breakthrough. It's because there is a sense that there's an outside influence, being God, that is intervening in that surrender process to bring about a shift and a change and a relief that the person in them of themselves couldn't achieve on their own. And it is humility essentially that promotes surrender, about that sort of laying something down, whether it's an unforgiveness, a resentment, a fear, whatever it could be. This kind of humility sort of opens the door to surrender. But us humans humility does not always come naturally, and often it's the pain of not surrendering that leads to surrender. And I did make a video with an example of this called God is Greater Than Any Circumstance, and you can check that out in my channel. But essentially it's the pain of life that it's often like we don't run joyously to hell. We don't run joyously to heaven, but we back away from our hell. It's like pain of life backs us into a corner where often surrender is the only option left, or it's our only hope for change. And that's often where I don't think God does that to us. I think we do that to ourselves. When we're backed into that corner, something takes place that I think of a spiritual nature that leads to the Spirit being able to move within the person to bring about change. And whether we look at that as resolving some aspect of the old nature, or however we want to describe that, something takes place that the person just is instantly changed. It may not be dramatic in the sense of like everything being changed, but for some people that can be the case, where they just step from darkness into the light and they're never the same, end of story. But for a lot of people it's like little mini surrenders. And little surrenders that have a significant change. So I think there can be moments where we surrender in quite a significant way that is experienced quite deeply. But then there's kind of like having an attitude of surrender, it's like a lifestyle or an attitude of surrender whereby it's happening kind of continuously, or what's the word I'm looking for? Consistently. Some things we might need to surrender 5 or 100 times a day. We're dealing with a past hurt that's come up, or a fresh wounding from someone in a relationship, and we want to resent and take them to court in our hearts, and we might find ourselves having to surrender that many times a day. I think one of the reasons that surrender is so elusive and challenging is that it's essentially where the dying to self takes place, where we die to some human way of handling something and choose to hand it over to God, trusting that He will do something with it, or depending on what it is, that issue is in God's hands. And it's kind of like a step of faith. Surrender is a step of faith. It's trusting that when we let it go, that God will, we just end up trusting God with it, rather than sort of telling God what He should do with whatever it is that we're struggling with, because often our idea of justice is very different to God's. And so surrender really is a step of faith. And from that perspective, it's kind of like where the rubber hits the road in regards to faith. Either God is real or He is not. And when we surrender, when we take that step of faith, either God's going to show up and work in our circumstances, or He's not. Essentially, it's faith that opens the door, essentially gives God permission to work in our lives. As He is a respecter of our wills, as He doesn't impose Himself, we are essentially the ingredient, and our surrender is the ingredient to enable God to do His thing. And it might not happen straight away. It might take quite a long time, depending on the situation, for the issue to be dealt with. But that's, I guess, the trust, is just trusting that God will, well, it says He'll never leave us or forsake us. So there's a sense that when we stop living our life on our terms, that we open the door to live on God's terms. I would say that it can be a lot of shame for us if we think that it's a one-time surrender, because often we can have issues that take a long time to resolve themselves, and we can condemn ourselves from the point of view of saying, well, I surrendered and I handed that over last week or last year, and now it's back, and we can be seduced into condemning ourselves. But I see surrender and the journey with God, it's a lifelong thing, and provided we keep, sorry to use a cliche, but take up our cross and follow Him, that we're in the game, we're in the journey, and God, there's always hope. So this is to be an encouragement that if you're finding yourself unsurrendered, struggling with surrender, or with certain issues that you feel like should have been resolved before now, that there's always another chance to have another go. And that's really the outrageousness of the cross, is that God's forgiveness, and God's forgiveness is absolutely complete. It's not determined by our effort or our performance. It's got to do with what He's already done. So I say this just as much as an encouragement to myself as to those listening. And for any honest Christian, the journey of surrender and handing things over is a constant thing. It's a lifelong thing, and no one has ever truly arrives anywhere in that sense. It's a lifelong deal. So it's important to join the club. That we're not what we used to be, we're not what we want to be, but we're right where we need to be, essentially. And so maybe sometimes it's helpful to just do a blanket surrender and step back into the journey. Anyway, I hope you found this video helpful, and I will see you again in another video.